And we are live. Today I'm here with Hassan. Really looking forward to getting started here and chatting about difficult dialogue. And just want to welcome everyone to the live stream. Hassan, it's great to have you.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen you, so it's nice to connect. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So, for those who are listening in, tell us a little bit more about. You're going to be speaking at Control the Room next week, and you're actually hosting a workshop as part of the workshop series just before the conference starts. So, tell us a little bit more about this difficult dialogue workshop and the talk and what all that means.
So one thing that I should say is that it's always interesting, this concept of difficult dialogues, because I started doing discussions and holding dialogue back when it was still easier to be having them, right before like everyone became aware that it is a big problem that we have right now. And so what the workshop's going to be is really all my 16 years of experience across 3 different continents, and showing you all the ways that I found to be really successful in bringing groups together and helping with conflict, whether it's conflict in a boardroom or in a community or in a nonprofit organization. And so I'm really gonna instill all the things that I know and give people hands-on experience in running what I've found a lot of success in after about 10,000 discussions, with people all over these different countries, and some of the real thread of humanity and patterns that I've seen across those dialogues as well.
One of the things we've talked about in the past is how often teams and companies will kind of put off these conversations, or even individuals, will just avoid the conflict, and or maybe they'll have superficial conflict because they're not getting to the real, like, what or the why of the roots of what the problem is. And then it just builds and builds and builds until it's at a breaking point, and there is nothing that can be done, and they go find another job, or worse, there's physical conflict or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the moment of the great resignation, right? So many people are looking for more purpose-driven work, and I think it's just coming to the forefront now, and all those underlying issues catch up to organizations. And I think also psychological safety is something we know very well in terms of teams and how they perform. And I think a lot of times kind of there's like the shininess of running like a one-off thing, or just kind of having someone come and talk about it for a little while and thinking that it's fixed. And I think we're learning more and more that it's not, that it really has to become a habit for teams to thrive, to know each other, and to overcome a lot of these shifts that we're seeing today through COVID and also globalization.
Yeah, you mentioned shifts. That's the theme of the conference this year, and it was pretty intentional. As we were looking at the nature of facilitation in general, the landscape that we're in right now with COVID and with just so many things. I mean, even the Great Resignation, which you just mentioned, the companies are losing people. People are shifting to new jobs, shifting to new careers. And facilitation at its core is about change. It's about navigating shifts and about supporting those shifts. And so I'm excited to hear all the talks that are coming to us in Austin and through Zoom and VR next week around shifts and all the different ways we have to think about embracing them.
Yeah, and I think it, yeah, I always love having a conversation with you, because I know you and I come at it, well, and everyone comes at it from slightly different angles. And I think I'm so excited too to see all the speakers. I know that the lane that I drive in really is around, what debriefs can look like, what
Mm.
dialogues can look like, what brainstorming can look like in new ways, and how to spark that. But I know even like with your background shifts, you bring a different tool set to the table. And I know that you're running something too around how to hold meetings and things like that, and just how to be effective and how to make sure that voices are heard. And yeah, I mean, I'm curious too, like, how do you feel like shifts show up more, and what you love to do
Mm.
nowadays?
Well, I mean, it's pretty core to everything, right? I mean, we talk about voltage control being a change agency, and change is about shift, right? It's about, being intentional, uh, change. It's about adapting and growing, and responding to new developments and unexpected events and ambiguity, etc. And I'll say that, to me, probably the most powerful thing is when we can shift mindsets
Mm.
and we can help people understand to view the world slightly differently, and the power that can come from that.
Yeah, that is one core piece that I'm really excited to talk to people about in the session. And I think, we talked before about like what is difficult for people to actually talk about, like what are the topics that are hard for people. And it's interesting because when you ask folks like what's difficult to talk about, and I'd love to know if anyone has thoughts on that. And hello, Afzul, welcome to the stream. And difficulty is I think it's also about that perspective. Like difficult topics come about because you've had bad experiences in the past. And for me, one of the core techniques that I really am going to try to show people is about how we can take these difficult topics and find ways to ask um, questions in a very specific way that allow the group to kind of breathe into it, a softer come into behavioral change and holding different perspectives. I think a lot of times when we're when we have an opinion and we're met with an immediate disagreement, it just makes us kind of rear back a little bit and defend ourselves. And so as facilitators, I really want to show and highlight um, how I think I found a very good way to help groups, whether it be around, a whole bunch of different topics, find shifts and open up to that. So,
As I hear that, Hassan, it makes me think about the importance of shifting the narrative because,
mm,
if we are having an internal narrative around the fact that this thing is difficult, we're already setting ourselves up for failure, right? That's a defeatist mindset, versus like, where's the opportunity? Like, it's optimistic. I can address this is a challenge. People are struggling. I'm going to address this, but this notion difficult almost sounds like insurmountable, like when people talk about like, oh, I can't do this because it's too hard. So changing that narrative can be really, that internal narrative we're telling ourselves can be really important.
and I was so torn, like when I was coming up with the name of the workshop. But I know that people right now they're looking to overcome that difficulty. But it is, you're absolutely right. It's like, you know, I think, yeah, you shouldn't hold that when you're approaching those things. And I think I'm real excited for this summit because I'm looking forward to ways that I can help people overcome that, and also all the wonderful speakers that we have to really help people move through those moments. So,
Yeah, I think it's also a bit about not only shifting the internal narrative so that we're more willing to approach it. So we're not coming from we're not paralyzed with fear,
mm,
that this is possible, but also we shift the narrative in the room so that, it's about, because I think it's so easy to commiserate or so easy to blame or unpack the negative. Whereas
mm.
if we shift the narrative on what could be, or what we appreciate about this situation, it can easily help us find the path, the way out. And I think so often, it's alluring. It's like I was listening to a story on NPR, and it was actually, someone did a study on modern media and
Mm.
how they focus so much on the negative, and also did some parallel research to how there's a disproportionate amount of negative adjectives compared to positive adjectives. So our
Hmm.
language is skewed to be more, even more illustrative or more detailed when it comes to negativity than it does positivity. And so
Hmm.
that shift can be really powerful to get out of that thinking and help teams focus on, hey, this is not necessarily something that we can't get past.
Well, yeah, and also too, I think when you're mentioning that, what comes to mind for me is people dread interventional type
Hmm.
moments. I mean, it's like, so if you ask me to come to a meeting or come to have a discussion because things are already in a really bad place, then who's going to want to go do that? And I think for me, dialogues, and what I mean by dialogues becoming a habit is that when we have the chance to meet regularly, it it can be light one week. It could be a little bit more heavy one week. It doesn't have to be, end of the world discussions. It can just be, hey, I'm not, I don't really like how things are going in this direction. Can we ask questions around how we can build off of this or
Hmm.
shift this at all? And when people know and they get those reps in, they build that muscle memory and that pattern of actually going in and doing that, and they stop looking at it as a dreaded moment, and they know that it's going to be something that's just part of their week, part of how things are done, part of the company culture. And I think that is when it gets to a really powerful point. And I think you're absolutely right, which is, yeah, with what you said.
It also gets into this notion of um, not only you talked about the reps and whatnot, but it's about connection and rapport. Right.
Right.
How do we learn each other and the way we respond to things? That dread can also, it comes back to that internal narrative, right? It's like sometimes the dread is a story we're telling ourselves, and it's not doesn't have anything to do with what's going to actually happen. Have you ever been invited to a meeting, a conversation where it's like we need to talk?
Yeah. Yeah, I have had a few of those in my life. Yeah, as we all
And
have, right? Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes you go in and it's no big deal. But,
Right.
like, that narrative, that story, it's the dread is just building and building, and, I feel like that if people are using your technique and someone says, "Hey, we need to talk," or "Let's talk," you wouldn't think twice about it because you're having those conversations so regularly, and you know what it's like to, it's it's like riding a bike, you know?
And yeah, and also too, like when you said we need to talk, I also and this is another thing that I talk about is that I had in my mind like this big cold office, the door opens and slams behind you and you sit down and like there's this big desk in between you and the other person. And I also talk about like space and how we build an environment that feels more relaxed, and that's how we overcome some of those things. And I remember in Thailand when I was there, we used to have these meetings with 20 people, and the room was like the size that could fit 100. And the space between each person was so far away that even if we're just talking about something relaxed, it was just a simple decision. It just felt so lofty and so important, that it was hard to even get things kind of moving. And so it's funny how we find ways to set ourselves up for success in those moments or for failure, right?
Gosh, man, it just made me hearing you say that made me have this thought I've never had before, which is, you think about the government, and they're in these big, huge rooms with like wooden lecterns, and like they're all spread out, and they were invited to stand up and speak at this thing, and it's all this pomp and circumstance, and like, is that is that circumstance, is that environment, like how is that impacting the decisions that get made versus like, hey, let's just figure this out.
Yeah, and I think it's about barriers
Yeah,
and physical barriers,
yeah.
you know, cultural barriers, barriers in how the process should go in a healthy way. And I think, yeah, we'll have to think about that more. Yeah.
Yeah, designing space is important. And maybe I'll just leave a little thought for folks. There's some really interesting concepts and Japanese around different kinds of space,
Mhm.
and I think it's four different words. So anyone that's interested in space might go look that up. Uh, Not enough time to get into it today, but it's been a pleasure chatting with you, Hassan. And any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'd like to leave people with is what I often leave, and it's a question, is that if you if you started to shift the way you approach discussions and dialogues, personal and professional, how in what ways would it improve your life? And
Mm.
so I would love to know the answer to that question, and I would love for you guys to join in what I'm doing, coming up next week, and look forward to seeing you there.
Look forward to seeing you too, Hassan. Enjoy your day.
All right, thanks, Douglas.